Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. This is the sixth webinar in our summer education series, Accountability Isn't Optional, How to Respond to Absences, Tardiness, and Performance Gaps Without Burning Bridges. We are doing this webinar in partnership with the wonderful Sharyn Weiss. She is the founder of Weiss Practice Enhancements, and it's really an organization that's here to help dental leaders who want to build a practice culture where the team shows up with enthusiasm, leadership feels like a partnership, and financial success comes as a natural result of everyone working together. So Sharyn's going to be driving a lot of this. She has a lot of really great tips and strategies for how you can build a more responsive team to help build that accountability with them. So really excited to hear what she has to share with us today. And, we'll be here at HR for Health giving you extra bits of advice on how you can, build up the documentation side of things. So if you ever do have to get into a termination conversation, you have the information you need to be able to protect your practice. Okay, take it away, Sharyn.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Jasmine. We're going to try to avoid the last resort of termination, and we're going to look at everything you can do up to that to create accountability in your practice. So here are some of the tools and techniques will be packed into this 1-hour webinar. We're going to first begin with talking about your mindset and how that inadvertently might interfere with your goal of employee accountability. And then I'm going to teach you some strategies. One will be the CPR approach, which will help you avoid those endless conversations that you might be having with an underperforming employee. And then we're going to talk about how to set ground rules or SOPs or expectations so they make sense for employees. And then we're going to talk about how to expand your job descriptions so that they cover what you want employees to do, but which they thought previously was not part of their job. And we're going to look at how to have a commitment conversation and change employees' language from victim mentality into accountability language. So get ready because this is going to be a rockin' webinar. And we are taking scenarios from the HR Trigger newsletter that HR for Health and I co-write. And if you're a subscriber to that, then you know that what we do is we ask folks to submit their high drama scenarios, and then we answer them from both practice management and a HR legal viewpoint. So here were the top 4 scenarios that were submitted to us. And what I'd like you to do is, as I explain them, write in chat the number or the numbers which most reflect your practice as well. So first up, we have the tardy employee who is chronically late, but who you probably like, and so you don't know what to do them. So that is scenario number 1 that we're going to cover. Number 2, which was by far the most popular issue, was the separating of employees from their phones, which seems like an impossible task, but it can be done. The third scenario were people who I would describe have a silo mentality, meaning they want to do only what they think is their specific job, and that's it, because even if there's craziness all around them, they will ignore it. So that is scenario number 3. And scenario number 4 is the employee who does do what you want them to do for the first week, and then slowly starts fading away. So that is scenario number 4. So Jasmine, do we have any numbers in the chat about which scenario was most popular?
I do not see any submissions just yet. If you guys want to be able to, give your opinion on what you want us to cover, just drop that into the chat section.
Okay.
I'll give you, do we want to give them 30 seconds?
Sure. I also do want to make sure that you know where the chat stuff is. So Jasmine, do you want to just talk that through for a second where they can find that?
Yeah, so you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a little selection of windows for you. There's, one little participant count, a little message icon, two message icons next to each other, and then a message with a question mark. For the number voting, you can drop it in the section with the two chat icons next to each other.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully
We,
that will
we
get
do
you.
have a couple of questions that have come in so far, though,
All
so
right.
we do see some participation here. Don't forget, guys, there's a prize.
Okay. All right. Well, triggering on that. With participation, we believe should come rewards. So if you are a brave practice leader and you are willing to ask a question or share an anecdote or share an insight or even make a comment, comments like Sharyn is obviously the best trainer I have ever seen, or I think she's smoking something funny. Either way, if you participate by writing something, then we will give you this classic book by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And you may have read that in college and maybe somewhere, but if you would like that as an addition to your bookshelf, make sure you participate. And as well, participation, of course, has its own rewards. And Jasmine and I are considering even doing some sort of book club meeting about that book, about how those principles can apply or maybe not apply to life in the practice. So if you participate in the comments and you want to be part of a book club, just write book club also, or even BC. All right. We ready to
Okay,
go?
and we do have one vote for section 1, one vote for section 4, and Holly noted that she doesn't see the two chat icons next to each other. Okay, if you can't find it, it's fine if you drop them in the little question section then. Thanks, Holly.
Okay. All right. Well, let's be all on the same page, so to speak, about what we mean about accountability. And so here is a generic definition that we can use. Now, first of all, if this is a real issue in your practice, one thing you can do is have the team in a team meeting define what they mean. How would they define accountability? And then you can share those definitions and look at what is and what is not, and that might get you into a rich conversation. But for tonight, let's use this definition. Everyone commits to following through at the highest standards possible, regardless of obstacles. Now, let's take a second to look at the words I underline. So, everyone commits. That means they are making a promise to do something, to follow through. It is not a, I hope I get to it. Well, if I have a chance and yeah, if I, have some spare time, I might do it. It's not even, I'll try. It is a commitment they are making to you personally and to the practice to do this thing and follow through, meaning not just halfway, but all the way and at the highest standards, meaning this is what you would have to define with your employee. What do you mean by success? How would you know they followed through and did exactly what you wanted them to do? You will have to define that up front. And finally, maybe the most important part of a culture of accountability is that people do follow through regardless of the obstacles, because now once you ask them to do something, they are the project manager and they do it regardless of the obstacles or facing an obstacle they do not have a solution for. They can come to you for some guidance, but it doesn't mean just giving up. All right. So if that is the culture we're aiming for, what gets in the way of that happening? Well, sadly, the first thing that gets in the way might be you. And this would be how you approach things, your mindset about how comfortable you are with delegating things, responding to questions, and giving your employees feedback, direction, and support. So part of this is you and your skill level and your comfort level in giving feedback and direction. So this is, of course, one half of the equation of why accountability might break down. The other half is your team. So they may be afraid of what you're asking them to do because what you're asking them to do might actually diminish what they see as their authority or expertise if they're being asked to, let's say, help someone else, or they're not enormously motivated to do it because they don't see much wrong with the way they're doing it now. And most people resist change. They'll really go for what is familiar, even if it's not working that well. So you're combating their fear, their complacency, possibly their competency in that they really, truly do not know how to do this or are capable of doing it. And then finally, could be their motivation. They don't want to do it. And perhaps, in a way, we could see their point of view because they haven't been acknowledged or recognized or rewarded for doing things in the past. So these are the things that might get in the way. But for right now, let's look at the you portion of this equation. And I'm going to stop here and say that I work mostly with dentists, and I will say that dentists are among the kindest, gentlest people there are. You went into a helping profession to treat people for oral health issues, and half of these patients do not appreciate your treatment. So it is a rough job. But here you are, these kind, gentle people, and you really, really want to avoid drama or conflict. In fact, you look at it like it's some big hairy spider in the middle of the room, and you're hoping if you just ignore it long enough, the spider will disappear. Sadly, this isn't really the way it works. Conflict almost never just goes away on its own. And I think you spend so much time avoiding it because you are worried that something like this might happen to you. But frankly, I have actually never seen an employee go berserk against their boss, but I recognize that this is your fear, that if you address a conflict or an employee who is underperforming, they will create even more chaos or they will simply leave. And if we were to go into what you might be saying to yourself, it would be this: I need this employee more than they need me, so I'll tolerate almost anything just to keep them here. Now, this is a mindset based on fear because you're assuming you will never be able to find another employee. And you're also assuming that if you speak up, if you declare a boundary, then you will lose control. But of course, the opposite is really what's happening, because when you give into this kind of mindset, you've actually lost your agency, your power, and your employees recognize that basically you will tolerate almost anything. So what I have seen practice leaders do are ineffective methods instead of just directly approaching the employee with a directed feedback. So the first thing I see is some passive response, which is just sighing and complaining all the time. Now, if you're complaining to me as your consultant, that's one thing. But what I have seen, unfortunately, is practice leaders complain to their spouses who are pretty sick of it, or worse, complain to other employees, which unfortunately then creates a culture of gossip and triangulation. But then we have the other side of practice leaders who are saying, well, I'm just going to take charge. I'll create them a step-by-step checklist or a spreadsheet or an SOP, and by golly, they'll just follow that. And sad to say, most times that I've seen that happen, the employee does not follow the checklist. What they end up doing, you might have experienced, and say, oh, I forgot. Right? And one issue with this is that you created the checklist. And as we're going to talk about in a few minutes, this means that you solved the problem instead of the employee solving the problem. So this won't work either. Or you get so fed up, you sort of revert to middle school disciplinary actions and you threaten to write them up. And some of you even do write them up. And while I absolutely believe in some documentation, as Jasmine and I will talk about, writing them up as a punitive measure is never going to result in a more motivated, more competent employee. So this is not really an effective strategy or threat. The most often thing that I see practice leaders do is just have conversation after conversation with the employee and nothing ever changes because basically they know that you will tolerate their behavior because you are afraid of conflict. So ultimately, that nice, gentle practice leader that I described earlier, eventually they have enough and they get fed up and they explode and they become what I call Dr. Volcano, and they sort of spread the lava all over the team. And what happens then is that the team is focused on your behavior, your outburst, instead of all the stuff that led up to your behavior. And then you just repeat the process. So let's look at how we change this entire dynamic. Because ultimately, you should remember that your team is judging you and observing you and deciding about the strength of your leadership by how you're responding to these bad apple employees. And everyone in your team knows who the bad apple employees, and they are waiting and watching you for what you are going to do. And just like any bad apple, the adage, it spoils the barrel. If you don't react well to the one employee, what happens is that everyone else concludes that I don't have to do anything either because the doctor is never going to call me on account for it. So let's look at how we change this. We're going to use each scenario and I'll give you some strategies, but all of these strategies can be used for any scenario you face in your practice. So the first scenario we're going to tackle is this chronically tardy employee. And we're going to change perhaps your pattern of having endless conversations with people that go nowhere and that seem repetitive into what we're going to call the CPR approach. And this approach is something I love. It's going to consist of 3 separate conversations, and that's it. And of course, it is an acronym standing for content, pattern, and relationship. So let's walk through how all of these conversations might sound. So the first conversation, when something happens that you don't love, right? When the employee does something that was against your guidelines, undercuts your expectations, or is just not fitting in with your culture, you're going to talk about the content of what happened. Now, in every feedback conversation, there are basically going to be 3 elements of your conversation. The first element, the first stage, let's say, of any feedback, whether you're giving positive reinforcing feedback or change-oriented feedback, is to begin with a neutral statement of the behavior. So it is just like you're observing from a video camera. I've noticed you've been arriving 10 minutes late for the last 2 weeks. Notice it's just neutral. It's observational. It's a fact. Now, the next thing you're going to talk about is what is the impact or the consequence of this behavior. Now, this could be the impact on you personally, on patients, on the fellow team members, or on the practice in general. In this case, it is the impact is this means you miss important information at the huddle. And maybe you might want to add, and we now have to stop and catch you up, which makes us all late. Great. You started off with, here's my observation of your behavior. Here's why this is a problem. And now you're going to make a request, what you want the employee to do differently. And this should be as specific as possible. So I'm not, instead of saying, I need you to arrive on time, let's say, let's say there shouldn't be any miscommunication about what on time means. Maybe it might be 5 minutes before huddle or at 6:50. It is exact. Be as specific as you can with the request. Now, you may have done a fantastic job at opening this conversation. You have delivered your feedback and you think you are good to go. But usually your employee doesn't just nod and smile and say, hey, doc, you're totally right. I'm on it. I will never do it again. Often what comes next is your employee's reasons for why they didn't do what you wanted to do. And it could be, of course, traffic, the kids, a broken alarm, whatever. But there will be a rationale that they're going to offer you for why what you wanted to happen didn't happen. Okay, this is now where you're going to be at another choice point. And because you are problem solvers and kind and compassionate people, you are going to want to suggest a solution to their problem. But I am going to recommend to you that accountability means that the person has and takes the ability to solve their own problems. If the barrier is related to them, then it is their problem to solve. Because if you start suggesting solutions, what you might get in response is what I call the yeah, but syndrome. Hey, so, all right, so how about if your husband takes the kids to school? Well, yeah, but he works the night shift and he's tired in the morning. Okay, well, what about, can your mother chip in? And yeah, but she works, right? So you're now in a tennis match where you're trying to solve your employee's problem. And remember, you want to think of them as the project manager. This is their project to solve. So instead, you can absolutely be compassionate. Wow, that sounds like a stressful situation, but this remains. Still, you do have to be here on time. So how will you manage that? What will you do differently? Okay, so now we can all hope and pray that this was great. You got the problem solved, but it is real life. And sadly, the employee does it again. And let's say they are late again in using this example. You are no longer going to have a content conversation. You had that already. You already explained that there was a consequence and impact, a problem to the behavior. Now you're going to talk about pattern, the pattern of behavior. And here's how that might sound. We talked about the importance of getting here on time, and you made a commitment to do that. By coming in late again, you've broken your commitment to me. I'm concerned that breaking your commitments has become a pattern. So notice, so they started off neutral observations. These are the facts. Now we're starting to get into the impact. This isn't the relationship I want to have with you or any employee. So one of the consequences of this pattern of behavior is that it is now damaging the relationship that employee has with you. Okay, so that is now the new consequence, the impact. And as a result that the employee has engaged in a pattern of breaking their verbal commitments to you, it is now time to document your expectations. Now, this is not a nice way of saying, I'm going to write you up, because a write you up really does sound like middle school discipline. I'm going to put you in the corner until you think about what you've done. What we're saying is we now have an adult contract between us that formalizes and codifies what I expect and your agreement to do that in the future. Now, you can create this contract any way you want. In the HR world, which Jasmine, I'm sure, is going to attest to, this is often called a performance improvement plan because it is assuming the employee is going to improve. does want to stay, does want to grow. So the plan outlines exactly how they will do that with you. Jasmine, did you want to share anything
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah. Now, like Sharon was saying, you don't necessarily want to threaten them with the writing up, but you do want to maintain that documentation for yourself and the protection of your practice. So once you get to that earlier, that pattern conversation, if you're a current HR for Health customer, you should be using both the violations and the notes sections of the portal. Notes is exactly that, noting that you had a conversation, that this seems like it could be an issue. Once you get to the point of having a performance improvement plan, you can document that as a violation. You can, pull down the drop down, select the reasoning for whatever the issue was you're having with the team member, and that gives you time-stamped documentation to be able to say, that you acknowledge that you were having issues with this employee, that there were performance issues, and it gives you the structure and the framework to be able to, if you do get to the point that they decide they don't want to take the effort, they don't want to meet these expectations that they've agreed with you on, that you can safely make that termination decision. So just like always have it on the back burner, that by documenting it early on, you're setting yourself up to be able to have that kind of defense.
Great. Okay. And the only thing I would add, whether you do a formal PIP that HR for Health has or less formal, make sure your expectations are very specific. If you can quantify what you want from them, right? And you have to define the standards of success that you're looking for. And I would encourage you to include dates where you will be following up with the employee, because giving a PIP on Monday and then never returning to it until 6 months later is way too much. You want to have check-ins with them that are documented and scheduled. All right. Well, let's look at if things really, really go awry. And even a PIP or a documentation has not changed the behavior, you are now at conversation 3, which is going to be about focusing on how the behavior has impacted the employee in terms of their reputation and their relationships with their peers. Now, the reason I like this is because most people do care about these things. If you have an employee who really doesn't care about how they're perceived or their relationships with their teammates, then you do have a bigger problem. But let's assume this is a pretty normal, healthy individual. They want to have a good reputation and relationships. So the conversation with them would be pointing out any or all of these consequences which affect the employee. So by doing this, by coming late, that employee may be perceived by her teammates as unreliable. And because she seems to ask for special stuff or isn't doing what everyone else is doing, that might create some resentment from her colleagues. And that might result in her colleagues being less likely to help her when she needs help. It might damage her reputation with them and in the industry in general, because ultimately it is a small world, and if that person wants another job in that community, well, this reputation will follow him or her. The behavior may also affect their compensation. If I believe in making compensation equivalent to performance, right? So if someone has repeatedly disappointed you and not followed your guidelines, they would not be eligible for a raise. And of course, finally, it jeopardizes their position in the practice. Now, these things, these consequences to them in terms of their relationships with their peers is actually pretty powerful. A few weeks ago, I was working with a dentist whose whole team ganged up on the hygienist. And this poor hygienist doesn't have the greatest social skills ever. And she had pissed them off over and over for too long a period. And now they were all ganging up together to find things she was doing wrong and telling on her to the dentist. And of course, when this all came out, she was devastated. Now, one of the reasons this happened, sadly, was because even though the dentist could see how she was not handling conversations with her peers up till now, he did not intervene. He did not give her effective feedback about that, and neither did the employees. So what happened was a big blow up, right? Which was very damaging in terms of everyone feeling like they're part of a cohesive group. So this is powerful consequences. Yes, I would absolutely recommend that you show that it's not just that you might fire them. It's that this is the issue that comes from their behavior. Now, here's how the conversation might sound. We need employee to talk honestly about whether you'll be able to regain my trust and if this is the right job fit. At this point, both your reputation and job with us is in jeopardy. So note how direct this is. There's no wiggle room here. You are no longer negotiating. Do you think you can do it? You're not talking about the content anymore. You're saying directly, look, this is a big problem. And we might decide in this conversation that this just is not the right fit for you. Now, I'm going to show you a question you can ask your employee, and my prediction is that many of you are going to kind of shake in terror about the directness of this question. But you can ask your employee, how motivated are you to stay here? And I recognize that this might feel like a really scary question because the person might say, not that much, right? Well, that is actually a good outcome because you no longer have to fight or stress or be frustrated about it. What they're saying is, I don't want to change or I can't change, and I don't think that this is the place I want to be either. And you know what? What a great conversation there. Why should you continue to struggle? Okay, so at this moment, I'm going to stop for a moment because usually practice leaders have some thoughts, questions, ideas about this approach. So I'm going to pause for a bit while you share some of your thoughts about this approach. And Jasmine, let me know if any of our participants are willing to participate.
Will do. While we're waiting, do you want to hear some of the earlier questions that people
Sure.
shared?
Sure.
Okay. Issue number 1 from Christy. Employee frequently uses the work phone to make personal calls to their son throughout the day, 10 to 15 minutes.
Ooh, wow. Yeah. All right. So that's the opposite of using the cell phone. It's using the office phone. All right. We'll hold on to that one because we will get to that.
Next one is from Carolyn. Struggle with an employee nitpicking and pointing the finger at others constantly and not holding herself accountable. Also getting employees to focus on what they are doing, being more accurate. Trying to find a way so I don't feel I am constantly griping.
Wow. Okay. That is a rough one, and I can see how that might drive someone crazy that you have an employee who points the fingers at other people. I love it. I think we can address that one as well. All right. Are there any comments, thoughts, opinions about the CPR approach?
One from Jillian. Here we go. I'm very impressed. I'm bad of thinking of a response in the moment.
It's no problem, of course. And it is really hard in the moment. I get you, which is why I often recommend that you at least outline what you want to say to your employee before you just go off and talk to them. In fact, one of the things that might work the best is think of the outcome you want first. What do you want to come out of this conversation? And then gear all the conversation towards that outcome. It's kind of a goal-oriented approach so that you don't wander around the farm for a while. All right.
Okay, and then a couple more. One from Jill. Sharon, this is genius. Love every step. This is super helpful. Thank you. Will you be sharing the deck for reference? Yes, Jill, we will be sending the deck, the recording, everything for reference.
Okay, and
Um,
Jill, obviously, I love you. Thank you for the kind words as well.
oh, and then for some reason I can't reply in chat, but I love this approach. But what happens when they say they are motivated, but then after a while go back to the same pattern?
Right. Well, now you have to make a real decision here, right? Because if their pattern up till now has been to agree and then slowly stop doing it, that is their pattern. That is the very thing they can no longer do. So if you have decided after conversation 3 that you are going to give them one more chance, then obviously you're documenting this too. And now it has to be really tight, right? The expectation is not so global. It's, I expect this every day, every day. And the next violation will result in your termination because what they're showing is really maybe they thought they would, but they couldn't do it. And there is no reason to continue to struggle with this. I sadly see practice leaders keep employees, unfortunately, too long. And it brings everyone down ultimately. So, as hard it is to hire people, I get it. I think, frankly, but bolstering someone who is just not going to fit your model or philosophy is way worse.
And then last one from Natalie. Love this approach. I've never considered being this direct, but I will absolutely try this.
Great. Okay. And if you hang on, all of you, I'm going to recommend some books for you, one of which absolutely outlines the CPR approach, and I think they can help all of you. So let's move on to some other strategies. So scenario 2 was the cell phone scenario, and this was submitted to us by a doctor. I edited a bit, but I really loved this scenario. The other day, this doctor was walking around to see what everyone was doing, and one was on her phone playing a game. When asked, she said she was bored, which, hey, I give credit for this employee to being honest. There's no reason anyone should be bored, and there are many things that need to be done. So sadly, the employer, the doctor, wasn't too pleased by this answer, needless to say. So she asked us, can I send her home like an out of school suspension with a warning about using cell phones in the office? And her second question was, and how do I go about implementing a no cell phones on your desk policy in the first place? All right, so that is the situation. What I'd like you to do is think about if you were that doctor or if you were Jasmine or I, what would you tell this doctor to do? All right, and I am going to give you 40 seconds to respond in chat, but do not press send until Jasmine and I tell you to because we don't want you to look at other people's answers. All right,
And then
so
Sharon,
you
do you want to skip back a screen so they can still see the scenario?
I will do that. Good idea. All right, so here is your scenario, and here are her 2 questions. And Jasmine, let us know when we have 40 seconds.
Will do. You got another 15 seconds or so.
You have to be a speedy typist in this webinar.
And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so press send.
Okay, here we go. Holly said, "My chat isn't working, but I would say let's find something to not make you bored. Do this. Dot dot dot."
Okay, great. All right,
Okay.
so you
Here's
would
one
address,
from
great.
Carolyn. Give them something to do and consequences if again.
Okay, all right. So some kind of similar thing to Holly's. All right, any other suggestions?
Anybody else want to submit an answer?
All right, well, it's totally
Yep.
fine
Go ahead.
because let's look at how I would have approached this, right? So first of all, I'm not loving the sender home like an out of school suspension, because again, that's sort of middle school, high school discipline, right? And you are dealing with adults, or at least I want you to be dealing with adults. So you can't be the adult child. It has to be adult. So I'm never going to go for an out of school suspension type thing or a write them up type thing. But here's what occurred to me in looking at this issue. Okay, is it possible that the practice is overstaffed in some way and this poor employee really doesn't have anything to do? Is that a possibility? It might be, but what is more likely is unclear expectations, right? So right from the get-go, every employee should understand if you complete your specific tasks, your role, our expectation is you're going to go and help other employees. And I don't care if it's going into the lab and helping there or starting the laundry. As that doctor said, there is plenty of other things to do. So what she should have done, or he should have done, the doctor, is made it very clear that if you've completed what you are responsible for, you are supposed to be helping other people. In other words, looking for work. It could be that this person is uninvested. It is a little sad and scary to me that this person didn't come up with any other solution than just sitting there playing on her phone. I guess my image is that this is a very young employee, but in any case, this is possible. She or he may be uninvested. And finally, obviously, there may have been a vague phone policy. Perhaps the doctor didn't talk about that up till now. Now, I do like your ideas of, well, give her something to do. But the problem with that solution is, does that mean you're always going to have to step in and give this employee a list of things to do because she's run out of things to do? That is not an accountable employee, right? And that creates you having to oversee her all the time. And for sure, you have way better things to do. So let's look at what we could do. Well, first of all, you might want to have a conversation with this employee. Now, what I believe is that it is way better and more motivating to have conversations where you ask more questions versus delivering a lecture. So notice what might happen if you had this kind of conversation. If you said, hey, board employee, tell me, what do you do here at the front desk that makes a difference in the first place? What is meaningful about your role? And how do you feel about it? Because if you have an uninvested employee, then perhaps a good intervention is to show him or her why they are important. So that would be how I start the conversation. And now we're going to ask questions that will ideally ignite some emotional intelligence. And here we are kicking into, how is this going to impact your relationship with your coworkers, right? So the question is, what impression are you giving to them when they see you on your phone and they're busy working? How do you think they feel about you when they see that happening? So given that, what do you think you could do to help them if you've completed your tasks? How would you find out what help they might need? You want her to come up with the answers rather than you delivering the information. And finally, a great way to ignite someone's emotional intelligence is to change their perspective from seeing themselves as a victim to putting themselves in someone else's shoes. And in this case, it would be your shoes. So you can say, hey, board employee, if you were me, if you were the boss and an employee told you they were bored, what would you think about that employee? How would you perceive them? What would you say to this person? And then finally, you could potentially ask that person, what do you think is a fair policy about phone use? Now we're going to kick into the person who said my employee is on the office phone for 15 minutes? Because here's a great question to ask them as well. Now, if you haven't set up a phone policy yet, or if people are not obeying it, then this might be a great question, because what I want you to do more of is ask them to solve the problem. It is a psychological truism that we do not argue with our own solutions or our own data. So if the individual or the team come up with a policy, it is way more powerful than you delivering it to them. So for the person who had the employee who was using their phone, the office phone, again, I would start off, hey, neutral. I see that you've been using the phone, the office phone, for about 15 minutes a shot. The impact of this is obviously pretty obvious. And in addition, now you could end up with, so I understand you have a desire and need to talk to your son, and yet you are being paid to be visible and available to the team. So what do you think, employee, is a fair way for us to proceed? Now, we're going to show also if you do want to set a ground rule about anything, and we're going to take phone rules just for a second because that's the example we're using. You have to do two things. First, you have to explain why you're making a rule. Why is this our policy? Why is this our standard? Employees want to understand what's the meaning behind this, or is it just some arbitrary thing you thought of to torture us? All right, well, in phone use, here are the possible consequences. It's a distraction. You look distracted. You're not paying attention. It appears that you're unavailable to work for us, and it gives an overall poor impression if you're talking personally when everyone else here is working and serving patients. And then once you talk about why this is a problem, then you can talk about now, the easiest cell phone policy would seem to me that phones are not in their pockets. It's not on their desk. Phones are left in their lockers or in their purses. And that's where they live the whole day, except if they want to use it at a break. And Jasmine, I'll love your input on this. What I mean by a break is that you have clocked out for a break. I will admit I am an old person. I remember when nobody had cell phones, or you maybe had a pager. If there was a true emergency, that person is given the office phone and calls, right? Because very often I know the objection that employees have to cell phone policies is that what if something happens? Well, great. If something really emergency happens, they'll call the office. Okay, any comments, questions that we have so far, Jasmine?
We actually got a cell phone related question. Okay. I'm an office manager. My husband is owner optometrist. I use my cell phone a lot, passwords, vendor calls, etc. So now some staff have started using their cell phones. How can I enforce the no cell phone policy when it seems as if I'm not complying myself? We don't have enough phones for everyone, and I also work from home sometimes, hence the reason I have vendors call my cell.
Okay, all right. Well, so first of all, do they know why you are on your phone at times? Hopefully you have explained that. And I'm hoping also that you're not wandering around the practice with your phone, right? So they're all seeing you do something that very much looks like a distraction. So I would hope that you're in your office, it's looking like a professional call, which it is. However, I will understand. I was leading a team meeting, and the other one of the dentists who was an associate was on his phone, right? And later on, I said, you really can't do that because you are the role model for your team. And now you have no leverage for telling them not to be on their phones because there you are doing it. So it is possible, right, that you might have to use, get another office phone to do this work. But ultimately, what I would suggest is that at least you start explaining why you are on your phone, that it is absolutely business related, and then you do this, right? When you guys are on your phones, this is the issue. This is what happens. And therefore, let's, as a team, perhaps come up with a policy that works for all of us so that we don't have those consequences. Okay. All right. Now, I know, Jasmine, you also talked a little bit about phone use policy from the HR perspective.
Yeah, so if you, like Sharon was saying, if you don't already have a phone use policy, you absolutely should have one. A great place is inside of your employee handbook. When you get a new employee, they sign and agree to all of your policies. And again, that is timestamp proof that they are aware of these requirements. So if you guys do want a copy of our recommended phone policy, feel free to message in the chat and we'll get that over to you guys as well, if you aren't already using the HR for Health software.
Okay. So let's go into scenario 3, which is that silo mentality. We can visualize it like it's a horse wearing blinders and like, I'm only concentrating on my operatory. I don't care about, the craziness outside because that's not my job. And in the example that was given to us at the HR Trigger newsletter, this is a fairly typical example where a hygienist is said, is asked to do reactivation calls, and her perception is that this is not my job. And this is where now we have to start expanding our ideas of what is someone's job. And the best way, the most easiest way is to begin with your job descriptions. So I recommend that job descriptions have 3 buckets, we could call 3 competency categories. And everyone understands that they will be evaluated and raises will be rewarded based on their performance in each category. It is not enough that you are a great hygienist with your patients. That is wonderful. We love it. But that is 1/3 of what we expect from you. We also expect you to be a great team player. So getting back to the board employee at the front desk, that would hit this person. We expect you to assist others. And for our hygienist, that's not my job to make calls. This is what might kick in. Practice building means that they are helping the practice thrive as a business. And so the justification for a hygienist making calls is because it supports the practice as a business as a whole, and her job specifically in ensuring that she does not have open hours, which are incredibly expensive for every practice. So these should be built into your job descriptions if they haven't already. I have job descriptions I'm willing to share for at least a dental office. And I know, Jasmine, you also have job descriptions from HR from Health.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So note that you can always update your job descriptions and your expectations. And when you do, if you do, it's a great opportunity for a one-on-one conversation with each person to describe what it is you expect of them. All right, let's talk about the final scenario, which is for me the most frustrating. So that is where your employee, you blow them up like a balloon on Monday saying, hey, I want the operatories to look like this. And Esmeralda's like, yes, I can do that. And for sure, she does that on Monday because you just talked to her. And on Tuesday, it's mostly okay. But on Wednesday, like, half in and half out. And by Thursday, it's completely gone. She's regressed to the mean. So what do we do about these employees? Well, one way of tackling this is to make sure you're having commitment conversations, not can you do me a favor conversation. And so in commitment conversations, there are only 2 roles. There's you requesting, and there's the employee who's expected to implement. So the requester and the implementer. Great. Now you have to make sure, though, in your commitment conversation, you are covering these 4 things. What is it you want them to do? right? What? And be really specific what I want you to do. If you can give them some measurables, some dates, excellent. But remember this, why? Why is this important to do? Why do this now? And why them? What is it about either their role or their skill set that makes them the perfect person to do this? You do need to define what is your criteria for success. So what is it you want it to look like at the end, right? And you both need to agree with it. And then what also needs to be included is when you are going to follow up or when things are due or milestones. So by Tuesday at 1, I need the report on my desk. On Thursday at lunch, let's meet, right? There has to be some milestones and dates attached to them. Okay, so you all might be thinking, oh, that's not so hard. No, that's easy. I can do that. Maybe you're also thinking, I do that. Well, let's take a little quiz here. So let's pretend that a doctor said, if you get a chance, they said this to their employee, could you find a list of unscheduled patients with outstanding treatment? So what I want you to do is evaluate that request and tell me how it follows or doesn't follow the commitment conversation outline I just showed you. And I'll go back to that in a second. But as before, you have 40 seconds to respond. Do not send until I tell you to, but you're going to evaluate this statement. Okay, so let's start it now, and I'm gonna just show you, well, it's too hard. All right, so you have 40 seconds to evaluate this. Jasmine, have you started the clock?
Yep.
Okay. And where are we in time?
We've got another 7 seconds.
Okay.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay. So do we have any evaluations of this request?
Okay, Carolyn said, of course I would be able to do that and show someone how to do that.
Okay, I'm not sure. Carolyn, thank you. I'm not sure what that is in response to. I think you were acting like the employee. But what I wanted is for you guys to evaluate, does this request from the doctor match the commitment conversation criteria? So let's just look at it together. Notice how this started. If you get a chance, this is not a request. This sounds like I'm asking a favor, and it's so vague. What do you mean if you get a chance? Is that, should I do this or not do this? Is this voluntary? Is this maybe 2 weeks from now, 2 hours? What does that mean? So you have to be really specific if you're making a request, right? It's not as soon as possible. It is by Tuesday. Be specific. Now let's look at the next part. Could you find a list of unscheduled patients? Oh, okay. Well, they could probably find the list, but I think what the doctor probably wanted was for that person to print out the list, right? So could you find a list? It is not meaningful at all. And the doctor could come back later on and say, did you find the list? And the employee says, yes, right? And then you're saying, well, where is it? Well, you didn't ask for it to be printed out. So this is on you, right? So could you find a list? Now, again, there's no why, there's no meaning attached to this. And then unscheduled patients from outside, from what era? Is this for the last 25 years? For the last 2 years? Again, it is so unspecific that it is almost guaranteed that you will be disappointed by the response. So this was not a commitment conversation. So, all right, let us move on to the last thing that might happen to you and the last skill I want to teach you. Now, quite often employees will say to you, look, I couldn't do it because X happened. The patient was really chatty and so I couldn't get to do it. Or nobody told me I was supposed to do this. Or I forgot to use your checklist. Or it's not my fault that we left Delta, right? So now they're giving you an excuse or what they think of as a justifiable reason that they didn't do what you wanted them to do. And in a way, this is sort of creating themselves as a victim. So here's what I want you to teach your team from now on. This is accountability verbiage. They can go to town in telling you all of the obstacles they encountered. I didn't anticipate that it was going to be such a chatty patient. I didn't anticipate that X would happen. But here's the part that you want them to focus on where they take responsibility, they take accountability, which is, so now I will. And you may have to guide your employees to do this over and over, but if you set this as your cultural standard, you're going to start turning things around because now it will be understood that they are still responsible for whatever was in their project, regardless of the obstacle, and it is their responsibility to figure out a solution. All right, Jasmine, you want to talk about this? Did I lose you, Jasmine?
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
There you go. Sorry about that. I was still on mute. So this really comes back to the original standing. So again, just maintain your documentation throughout all of these processes. If you're ever concerned, feel like it might be turning into a situation you can't handle, just make sure you have those timestamp documentations every step of the way. So whether that's building that information into the job descriptions on full range of responsibilities, if that is on, performance violations or even on, good performance to be able to take that into account when you get to the point that you are considering additional compensation.
Okay, so we will now, I know we're sort of at time, but I'm happy to stay a little bit longer and take any additional questions, your thoughts, your insights. And while you're putting that in chat or the question or the comment, wherever it's going, I will show you that here are some great books for following these techniques. These two, the Patterson-Grenny, they are from the same organization and they have the CPR approach. And this book talks, this is also a great book, which talks about that accountability language I showed you at the end. So I totally recommend all of these books. And yes, we will make the slides available for you, so don't worry about scribbling really quickly. I do want to also offer you this special opportunity if you have an issue that we didn't discuss in this webinar or it's something that's been frustrating you, please give me a call. I'm happy to talk with you and have a complimentary strategy call. I will walk you through what you could possibly do. And we can also look at the bigger picture of how to create a culture of accountability. And I know also HR for Health is also offering this pretty good deal.
Yep.
Jason, you want to talk
Yep.
about that?
If you guys are interested, you can either scan this QR code or email us directly at hello@hrforhealth.com to get your free HR compliance consultation. We'll make sure you're all buttoned up, not exposing yourself to any unnecessary legal risk. And we're also offering a waived activation fee to our webinar attendees. And really quickly, great question from Holly here. These are so many great ideas. How do we go about implementing team meeting, one-on-ones? If we wanted to change our performance expectations on the job descriptions, do we meet with everyone to go over those?
Wow, what great questions. Right, so here's the deal, Holly. If you truly want to change the culture, then everything you named is yes, right? You will have to have big team meetings where you're describing, hey, we need to make a cultural change and why and how. And it will also absolutely entail individual meetings. Again, one of the strategies I've seen practice leaders do that is not great is they will have someone who's underperforming, but they'll talk about it to the team as a group. And what always happens is that one person is completely oblivious and the rest didn't really need that conversation. So, yes, you will have to have one on ones. And I have found that an introductory one on one where reviewing the job description is useful. Very often, those job descriptions are gathering dust somewhere. Nobody has looked at it since they were hired, maybe 15 years ago, including you. So, why don't you take a look at, are these still accurate? Do they have those three buckets? If not, contact me. I'm happy to help you with it, and I'll walk you through how you have that conversation with your employees. Is there anything else?
Awesome. I think there were a couple of questions that we didn't get to, but I think that now it's 9:06 in Eastern Time, I think 6:06 PST. But we will absolutely get back to all those additional questions directly afterwards.
And so, again, if you have one that you're either too shy to submit or you did submit but we didn't get to it, please do email me and I will respond from at least the practice management point, and Jasmine can do from the HR. And in any case, you can also submit it to the HR Trigger newsletter, and we will try to answer it there.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for your time. Sharyn, thank you so much. This was excellent. So many terrific compliments for you in the chat. I'll definitely send them all over.
All right. Thank you. All
Thank
right.
you so much, everyone. Bye.